so exciting for our commercial producers whom we serve that they're in a marketplace that's expanding and there's a vast appetite for more pork. And we're the people who provide this unique and leading genetic breeding stock to them to start that whole cycle. It's exciting to be in a growing global business, and we're step one in the chain.
Focus area for faculties in College of Ag, Vet Med, the Ag Engineering, Ag Economics, really for an area for faculty to collaborate and work on swine projects together. And really, the format is very similar to regional meetings that a couple of our swine specialists, Dave Stender and Mark Storley, had done for years. So we decided to kind of condense it into a one-day meeting focused really on swine reproduction. And we're going to kind of start with plenary speakers this morning, and then we'll have a couple breakout sessions this afternoon, and then we're going to come back together with a couple of different sessions with panels, with some speakers, but we really want to encourage audience participation. And in that one, we certainly welcome questions of the panelists, but then certainly we want some dialogue back and forth with that. So we want to thank a little bit of our planning committee. What you see here, we have Dave and Mark as a couple of our swine field specialists, Matt Ramosier, Jason Ross, who's the director of the Pork Industry Center, myself, Chris Rodemaker. I'm a clinical professor and the associate director at the Iowa Pork Industry Center, Ken Stalder and Laura Greiner from the College of Ag, Carl Kearns, an assistant professor, and then Stacy Matchin, a program specialist. As always, we couldn't do these meetings without some of our sponsors, our gold sponsors from PIC, Fast Genetics, Hogslat, Top Pigs Norsvin, and our silver sponsors, the Iowa Pork Producers Association, and the fine folks from NEDAP. So if you see any of those folks here today, please thank them again for their sponsorships. So we want to make sure we enjoy the day, ask lots of questions. As we're kind of getting back into live meetings, one of the things I've noticed is that we've got to remind people again, be sure to please kindly silence your cell phones, silence your ringers. If you have to take a call, be sure that you're being courteous to our guests and make sure you do that and take it out into the back if you do so. Now, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to one of our founding planners, Dave Stender, to moderate our first session. Dave, take it away.
Thank you, Chris, and thanks everybody for coming. We're excited about the day. We hope that you can pick up a couple of the new tips on sow management and breeding management today as we go through the talks. We are really lucky today to have Jenny Patterson start off our day for us. Lucky in that we're kind of in between the COVID shutdowns, and it's all the way from Canada, and we're looking forward to her talk on longevity of sows. And Jenny's a research associate at livestock genetics in University of Alberta, and she does innovative research projects and works directly with industry partners and producers to implement those kinds of things. And she's been working on these kinds of the longevity of sows for quite a long time. And so, Jenny, we're glad to have you here, and it's time to come up and tell us about sow longevity. And here we go.
Thank you. Good morning. So first of all, I'd like to thank the organizing committee for having me here today. I'm very honored to be here and have this opportunity to share some of our work with you. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge some of the companies that we work with. We leave this to the end too many times, and we don't necessarily give proper thanks. So I'd like to say thank you to Livestock Gentech and the University of Alberta, where I work. I have the pleasure and honor of working with several industry partners that help support my position at the University of Alberta, being Centera Farms, the Hannar Company, Sunhaven Farms, and Southwest Veterinarians. We also can't do the work we do without the support from the National Pork Board and PIC. Also like to thank the companies within PigGen Canada that support Livestock Gentech. These are the faces of Livestock Gentech. It's Alberta's lead organization for livestock genetics and genomics research, and we're focusing more and more on applied transitional research. And it's led by Dr. Graham Plastow. Today, this is what I'm going to cover today. Start off by giving a little bit of an introduction and background, talk about some of the key aspects for sow lifetime performance. I'm hopefully going to give just a brief outline of why a gilt becomes a replacement female at birth, talk about the early responses to effective boar stimulation as the critical selection tool. In order to do this, we need direct and consistent contact with high libido boars. I'm going to talk about why we need to have those gilts in heat by about 200 days of age, and then talk about what we feel are the key components for gilt eligibility service. So when we started our project with the National Pork Board, when they created this initiative, they defined it as being the total number of quality pigs weaned during the productive lifetime of the female, from the time that she becomes breeding eligible until the time she leaves the herd. There are three factors contributed in sow lifetime performance. The first one being longevity, so how long she stays in the herd, and the next one being prolificacy, so the number of pigs produced during her lifetime. And the last one is fertility. It is a measure of non-productive days and overall efficiency. There are several limiting factors for sow lifetime performance. The first one being longevity, and really this is one of the greatest sources of variation of those young sows being removed from the herd. Our data would show about 10% of sows never gilts never for a litter, 15 to 20% only produce 1 litter, and 40 to 50% of the sows are culled prior to third parity. When we think of prolificacy, this number is affected by a whole host of different factors, including genetics, breeding herd management, so your AI programs, and sow longevity. It's a challenge because about 40 to 50% of gilts are culled due to reproductive reasons. And one of the limiting factors for fertility is about non-productive days, and 60% of the non-productive days are due to inefficiencies such as reservice intervals and culling intervals. One way we think we can overcome this is by good gilt management, and it is often overlooked as one of the critical drivers for sow lifetime productivity. Gilts are the foundation of good production, and gilts drive farm success now and in the future. We believe that good gilt management programs deliver gilts with known future performance to the sow herd. So here we feel that there are several stages to a good gilt management program. And what I really want to emphasize is a gilt becomes a replacement female at birth. So as we can see here, there are a host of other factors that actually affect our gilt replacement program, such as genetics and your health programs and nutrition. And all of these things have to be dealt with within your company and the professionals that you work with. But when we look at just the gilt management program, we feel there are 4 stages. The first one called pre-select, and this occurs about birth and at weaning. Gilts should have good conformation, adequate number of teats, good health, good structure, and what I'm talking about briefly today is individual birth weight and the birth weight phenotype. Pre-select 2 occurs about 140 days of age, and this is when your gilts enter the gilt development unit. Again, gilts must meet these minimum requirements. Final selection is where we're going to spend a lot of our time today, and it occurs between about 170 and 200 days of age. And this is when we implement good gilt management programs. Overall, our target is to have about 85–90% of gilts and estrus within 35 days, and our target of having all gilts with a recorded heat serve at 200 days of age. The final stage is the breed group management. We want to see you consistently meeting your breeding targets, but identifying the key targets for gilt eligibility being a target weight, target estrus, and service age, and feed management prior to breeding is really important. So the first thing we're going to talk about here, again just briefly, is the fact that a gilt becomes a replacement female at birth. And we're going to talk about low individual birth weight. So in this graph, we show 6 individual sows, and each point on the graph represents an individual weight of a pig within that litter. Although these litters are exactly the same on paper, an average total born of 14 and an average litter birth weight of 1.4 kilograms, they're actually very different, both in the variation around the mean and the number of pigs that fall below 1 kilogram, which is shown to be a risk factor for future development. When we're looking at reproduction alone, there's a lot of good data out there. Dr. Bortolosso's group from Brazil showed that those gilts with a birth weight of less than 1.1 kilograms have compromised survival and growth. And it negatively influences piglet production. Dr. Fernanda Almeida has done some work showing that low birth weight also has a negative impact on growth performance, but it has negative effect on reproduction in terms of vaginal length and ovarian fluid dynamics. Our recent work from the National Pork Board really confirms this work. We showed that those gilts with a birth weight of less than 1.18 kilograms have increased mortality until 4 days of age, so it really drives early selection, early death, low growth rates at pre-selection, and delayed responses to puberty. On the other hand, we're looking at sow birth weight phenotype here. So on the horizontal axis, we have sows again, and each point within that sow represents a weight of an individual piglet and litter. But and each of these sows has an average total born of 14. But we can see these litters are very, very different. We would classify these sows that have as a lower litter birth weight phenotype sow. So you can see the average birth weight of all of those pigs within that litter is nearly less than 1, so that risk category. And at the other extremes, we have these sows with the high birth weight phenotype. So what our work showed is that those gilts born to sows with the low birth weight phenotype carry all those same risks that we just talked about for low individual birth weight. It's a trait that's repeatable over consecutive parities. And when we look at the terminal line offsprings, they have negative effects on body composition, postnatal growth, and performance and survival. So the next section, or the next key aspect we're going to discuss today, is that the early response to effective boar stimuli is the critical selection tool. So this graph is from Dr. Jeff Valet, and he did work with the National Pork Board as well. What he did here is he started about 1,200 prepubertal gilts, puberty stimulation at 160 days of age, and he either checked them till they came into heat or 100 days of age. As we can see here in the gray histogram in the back, this is the resulting distribution. So as expected, more gilts come into heat sooner, about 200, 210 days, and we see that tail ender, those delayed gilts, those hardhead gilts that we know sticking around, but they will eventually stand. And that's what Dr. Valet's study suggests. If you heat check gilts long enough and further enough, about 95% will cycle in 100 days of age. But the question is, do you want that? Dr. Valet has suggested there are 3 minor distributions, and he classified them as early, mid, and late responding gilts. And those late responding gilts, he identified as having lower cell lifetime productivity. And we would agree. We would classify gilts as being in heat within 200 and 210 days of age as select gilts. And any gilt that comes into heat later or has those delayed response has a non-select female. And as I hope to show you in the next few slides, is why these non-select gilts have poor lifetime productivity. But the question is, often when you talk to producers, their goal is to breed 100% of gilts that enter the gilt development unit. But I want to challenge you is that what you really want to do? Because as you select more and breed more and more of those gilts that are older and heavier and later responders, you're actually entering more gilts into your gilt herd that have poor cell lifetime productivity. So the first factor we're going to look here is that early age of puberty is associated with a greater probability of having a first, second, and third litter. On the horizontal axis here, we have age of puberty, and the vertical axis, we have the probability to generate the next litter. So as we can see, as we increase in age of puberty, we have a decrease in the probability to have that next litter. And these same authors showed that similar relationship between age of puberty and the rebreeding success and pigs produced during their lifetime. This data is from Dr. Rob Knox, and it's part of our National Pork Board study. He's just actually in the final stages of proofing the manuscript to be published in Journal of Animal Science. What he showed is that gilts most sensitive to boar exposure and display estrus within the first few weeks have fewer non-productive days and have improved cell lifetime fertility. So this data is actually from a work we did with Holden Farms in Waukon, Iowa, so close to here. What he did is about 270 gilts started puberty stimulation, and about 184 days of age, and he classified them by when they came into heat. So the first week, the second week, the third, and weeks 4 to 6. As we can see here, I guess, as expected, those gilts in heat within the first week were younger at puberty and accumulated fewer non-productive days from the start of puberty stimulation until they came into heat. Because they're younger, they're also lighter at the onset of puberty, as shown here. He did see some effects on growth rate, but it is a bit mixed in those results. But I think what is really important to take away from this is that those gilts in heat within the first, most sensitive to boar stimulation, as shown here, were older at the removal, so they stayed longer in the herd, and they had more pigs born during their lifetime. Another quick takeaway from this slide is really to show that age at first mating is intrinsically related to the biological variation in age at puberty. So again, this is relatively recent data from Dr. Kuketsku. Again, looking at those 3 key aspects that we talked about earlier, what he showed that gilts with, look at age at first mating on the horizontal axis. In this first graph, looking at longevity, he classified gilts, the herd size. So this actually large herd size in the Spanish herds was just less than 1,000. So most of our herds here will probably be classified as large. So as we can see, as we increase in first mating, we have a decrease in herd life days, so retention rates. If we look at the relationship to prolificacy, so number of pigs produced, we can see as we increase in age of first mating, we have a decrease in the number of pigs weaned. And also, as we talked about fertility, as age at first mating here, as we increase in age at first mating, we also have an increase in non-productive days. And this is largely related to weaning to service intervals and an increased percent of late returns. We may have all seen this data as well. First litter size is predictive of later performance. 2 different studies, and I can probably fairly much guarantee if we were to look at your data sets, we'd have the same answers or the same results. So if we look at this graph here, gilts were classified by their litter size at first fairing into 4 different categories. What shows here is these gilts classified as having a low litter size in their first parity also had lower litter size through their productive life. I think what this shows is that good gilts are consistently good sows. So really a big part of sow lifetime productivity is getting things right as a gilt. The next topic we're going to look at here is direct and consistent contact with boars is really the most potent trigger of pubertal estrus, and I think maybe one of the most under-recognized components as well. And this is because of the Bohr effect. And the Bohr effect really is the most potent stimulus for pubertal onset in gilts. It's a combination of tactile, visual, auditory, and olfactory cues. And all boars within your gilt development unit should look like this guy here, chomping and foaming, because it's in that salivary foams that you have the dissipation of the pheromones between the boar and the gilt. So this is why you need the direct nose-to-nose contact. Boar libido is also a critical factor. Again, often when you go into gilt development units, sometimes the boars that are used in your systems are probably the friendliest, the easiest to move, the guy that probably lies down and just is really easy to handle. But I challenge you that these aren't the best boars for puberty stimulation. We know that direct contact to a rotation of boars maximizes effect. There is some research showing that some gilts have more preference to different boars, so it's good to keep those boars mixed up. We have some old research now that direct contact is much better than fence line contact, and taking to the gilts to the bore is more effective than taking the bore to the gilt pen. I also think another under-recognized component of the gilt development unit is bore replacement programs. Again, talking to producers, you ask, why aren't you letting gilts out into with the bores in your bear system? And they're like, because the bores are like 4 years old. So you have to make sure you have good replacement programs, bores coming through. And the system said, oh, the gilts, we bred them, so we're still 10 months at having good bores within the system. We also advocate for the use of bear system, although I appreciate that it can't be implemented in all the system, but it really does combine all those factors of the bore effect. What it is 2 gilt pens retrofitted. In the middle, we house individual bores, so it really allows for good fence line and direct contact for the puberty stimulation in gilts. Again, looking at some of Dr. Knox's recent research. So he tested the effect of, in a bear system, just using fence line contact or having physical direct contact as well, in the bear system that had lots of good contact with bores. What he showed here, I guess as we would expect, over a 6-week period, those gilts that had physical direct contact were in heat sooner, they're in heat a little bit younger. He found no differences in growth rate and weight at puberty, but he saw an improvement in efficiency. I know in our struggles with labor and time, efficiency is really important. So again, if we look at those gilts in heat within the first week of puberty stimulation, about just over 10% more heat in that first week. By week 2, although it was just a trend, again, about 10% more gilts were in heat, having that direct contact in the bore system. In week 3, at the start of week 3, all gilts that were non-cyclic, and they had really good records to know this, and they used ultrasound. So on your farms, that might not be feasible, but he gave half of them just treated as control and half of them PG600. And what his data shows that those gilts given PG600 as an efficient management tool used effectively and direct contact had the best response to puberty stimulation. Overall, again, after 6 weeks, so longer you heat check them, more you're going to come into heat. You did see a trend in that more gilts, even within that bear system, had more with direct contact. So the conclusions out of his study here is that physical contact in the bear system for 15 minutes really does improve estrus and the interval to estrus. And PG600 and direct contact at week 3 increases the estrus response and retention rates. And again, although we advocate the use of a bear, but whatever system that you have within your gilt development unit, make sure you don't design it based on the key principles of the bore effect. The next key aspect is that we'd like to see a gilt and estrus by 200 days of age. This is a critical benchmark. And there's 2 reasons why. The first one, as we talked about, an early pubertal response is linked to better cell lifetime productivity. So in order to have those gilts in heat by 200 days of age, we have to start heat checking them earlier. And the second thing is this allows gilts to be bred at second estrus at acceptable target weights. So the biggest factor affecting this is the age of bore introduction. So in this work, again, this is from the work out of Iowa. We looked at 3 different stages or ages that gilts were first introduced to the bore: 160 days, 170 days, and 220 days of age. So if you can see, if we heat check them early, we get quite a nice normal distribution, and this would be expected. So those gilts are going to respond sooner. And it's a nice distribution. At 170 days of age, you can see it is a bit of still that extended distribution. We can argue there's a little bit more synchrony in the first few weeks, but we still do have some of those tail enders. And at 200 days of age, it's actually very synchronous because those gilts are older and most of them should be capable of responding. But what we lose is the fact to be able to distinguish between select and non-select females. So this is why we got to are recommending to breed or start puberty stimulation about 170 days of age. We're able to identify those select gilts. It's most effective in terms of timing and synchrony. and it's better utilization of space and labor. So it's a balance of checking too early, but not too late. The next component we're going to talk about here is some of the key components for GILT eligibility at service. We're going to look at those key elements that we'd like to see each GILT bred at when they're coming into heat. So this data, again, part of what I love about what I do is I get to work with a lot of great companies and meet a lot of good people. We did this work with PIC, so Dr. Juan Carlos Pinilla, and we worked with Kecken in Mexico. And I believe they're about 100,000 cell system. With excellent performance, they have an average total born of 16, 30% pigs per sow per year. Just really want to give a shout out to Kecken. The records they collected in the GILT development unit were really, really good. It really enabled us to look at their data and be able to provide some of those results. In this case, about 40,000 gilts were entered into the system, and it was about over a year and a half. They used direct bore contact within the bear system. Again, they started really early, about 150 days of age, and they gave these gilts to 230 days to come into heat. Any gilt that wasn't in heat by 205 days of age was treated with a GnRH analog. Their targets were to have gilts bred at 135 kilograms body weight and at second estrus. In this system, all parity 1 females were skipped after first weaning. So again, looking at those 4 key components for GILT eligibility, the first one is age at puberty. What we showed here, as we would expect, that we have age at puberty on the horizontal axis and retention rate to parity 3 and weaning at parity 3. And we only follow them to parity 3 is because after we get them to this point, I think them staying in the herd is fairly consistent. So it's the challenge of getting them to third parity. As we can see here, as we increase in age of puberty, we have an overall decrease in retention rate. And I think this is really important to point out. If, at least with PIC's recommendations, we'd like to see 70% of gilts entered or serve, make it to third parity. And we can see that we're achieve those targets in those early responding gilts. If we look at total pigs born over that pig's lifetime, again, the same relationship. As you increase in age of puberty, you have a decrease in pigs produced to parity 3. So this figure looks at age at service, and have to remember because it is intrinsically related to age of puberty, so a very similar relationship exists. Age at service on the horizontal axis. As we increase in age at service, we have a decrease in retention rate, and we have a decrease in the total pigs born over their lifetime. The next factor we're going to look at here is estrus at service and its effect on conception rate and litter size. So again, because they started so early, we're fairly confident that this is a true first estrus, or gilts were bred at, had delayed a heat no serve and bred at their second or third detective estrus. We actually saw no difference in conception rates, but the time we got to farrowing, we showed that those gilts that were bred at first estrus had lower farrowing rates at their first litter. And at their first litter, they showed, and this is also very consistent where you look at your data, that those gilts bred with at first estrus have fewer pigs born compared to those gilts bred with the second or third estrus. We didn't see an effect on weaned, and this isn't a result of them breeding at first, second, or third estrus. It's effective management. They've done a lot of cross fostering, so that's why we see a lack of effect on weaning. So the effect of breeding a gilt at least second estrus isn't only seen at first litter, it carries through their productive lifetime. And this is looking at retention of pigs born to third parity. So again, those gilts that were bred at first estrus were removed from the herd sooner and had fewer pigs born over their productive lifetime. The other key component, or another key component that we'd like you to focus on, is body weighted first service. What this shows, as we increase in weighted service, we have a decrease in the retention rate of PAICS 2, parity 3, and parity 4. And what we found is that a lot of these gilts actually fall out between first and second parity. So our recommendation here is really to breed gilts between 135 to 160 kilograms. Really avoid going beyond that because it has a negative effect on retention. The last key component here is management of feed intake. So any event that disrupts normal feed intake has immediate impact on LH secretion. And what this does is it removes the critical priming of LH secretion and follicular development. There are several risk factors. These would be relocating a gilt 16 days prior to breeding, any remixing of gilt before puberty stimulation or within the first 24 days of the onset of boar exposure, any crowding that limits feed intake, any health type incidents, or timing of your vaccines, or water not flowing well, and any fightings, regrouping, and fear. So specifically relating to breeding, we want to make sure gilts are acclimated to stalls or gestation pending at least 16 days prior to breeding. So over the previous several slides, we talked about those key components for gilt eligibility. Again, just as a quick review, age of puberty is really important. We need to start puberty stimulation young enough so they're in heat by 200 days of age. Because age of service is really related to your age of puberty, we want to have gilts bred about by 225 to 230 days of age. Weight at breeding, we want to breed gilts between 135 and 160 kilograms. At second estrus, and we really want to be careful of the feed management prior to breeding. So we want to think of these four key components just like four tires on a car. Sometimes when you talk to different people, they ask, if you were to choose one of them, which one would you choose? And I think it's really important to recognize each one of these components is equally important. And in some ways, they look at different things, whereas estrus at breeding might affect your litter size and conception rates. Body weight might affect your retention. And I think it's also important to focus on the finish line, not just first litter, and look beyond that, because really our goal is improved efficiency and cell lifetime productivity. The next key component is having good trained staff, and I know this is a challenge within our industry. We've had the pleasure of working with Holden Farms, and Aaron Hansen and Dr. Matt Ellerson spoke at our workshop at the Layman Conference a few years ago. And I think their message here is really good to share. Gilt management needs to be done on every farm, every day, and it really starts with the people on the farm. I realize that there's probably other fires to put out on any one day, but gilt management is really the future of the farms. And as Holden Farms has done, they really are trying to change the management and changing the farm's culture.
The next key component of a good gilt management program are your records and analysis. As the old saying goes, you can't manage what you don't measure. It is important to record the data accurately. This literally is the most important factor that makes the data usable and allows you to troubleshoot some of the production-related questions you may have. We'll then use this data that's collected on a daily basis to provide insight to track reproductive success and to enable data-driven decision-making. However, in many gilt development units, this data may be lacking and may not be analyzed. This is an example of a report that we provide on a weekly basis that both measures and manages those key components to gilt management. Here, we show 6 different farms, and on a weekly basis, we're looking to see how they meet the targets for age of puberty, heat at service, weight at service, and age of service. In general here, green means that they're hitting their targets, and red shows an opportunity for improvement, that they're either above or below the targets that we set, as shown here. And I think this is really important that we do this on a weekly basis because we're able to fine-tune as we go along. So in conclusion, there are 10 key aspects for capturing cell lifetime performance. The first two we only talked about briefly, but we discussed why the low individual birth weight gilts, so those gilts with a birth weight of less than a kilogram, are at risk for increased pre-weaning mortality, poor growth from birth, and lower retention to final selection. We only briefly talked about the sow birth weight phenotype, but what we did discuss is those gilts born to those sows with the low birth weight phenotype. They carry all the same risk as those low individual gilts do, but it's also a repeatable litter trait. We talked about why the early responses to effective boar stimuli is the critical selection tool. We discussed why direct contact and consistent contact with boars with high libido is the most potent trigger of pubertal estrus. We discussed why recorded pubertal estrus by 200 days of age is a critical benchmark to meet those targets of estrus and weight at service. We also discussed why an established heat no serve program really permits effective pre-breeding management. And we discussed why the heavyweight gilts at breeding are a risk factor for retention in the breeding herd. It is also important to realize that first litter size is predictive of later performance, so really emphasizing that setting those gilts up as your foundation of future performance. Trained staff really play an essential role to the success of a gilt development program, and of course, records and analysis are also essential to meet data-driven decisions. Dr. George Foxcroft always used to say that gilt development is not low-hanging fruit, because when we look at the definition of low-hanging fruit, it's almost completely the opposite. Gilt development isn't obvious, nor is it easy, nor can it be readily done in achieving the success, but it's certainly important and critical to make progress towards your objective. So finally, again, just another quick acknowledgement slide showing the companies that support our work and support our program. So thank you.